Well, today we're going to be taking a look at the astrology chart of King Charles. But this video is going to be a little different than the previous videos of the chart readings I've done before, because today we're going to be doing a deep dive. We're going to be looking at King Charles' astrology chart, but we're going to be looking at the planetary placements, and we're going to be just getting a general overall look instead of just asking a specific question. I really want to do this to show you all what kind of information we can really get out of an astrology chart. And I believe that you will be pretty impressed out of a lot of the little the nuances and the various karmic challenges and also karmic opportunities within the astrology chart. So this should be really interesting. If you want to learn astrology, this is going to be a good video as far as being able to learn how to look at a chart. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. For those of you that are new to my channel, make sure that you like and subscribe. Thanks to all my new patrons and subscribers. And also, I just want to remind you all, this is Vedic sidereal astrology. It's not Western tropical astrology. So I do want to make that clear. So in this astrology, King Charles is a Cancer ascendant. And so when you're looking up the calculators online, make sure you're looking for Vedic sidereal. My goal is 10,000 subs. We're almost at 5,000. So I'm very excited about that. If you're interested in a private reading, check for details down below. Also, I do want to remind you all about the new channel that I'm a part of called Psychic News Report. Again, details are down below if you're interested in kind of seeing psychics and astrologers and their perspective of the news. It should be quite enjoyable. I also want to remind you all, this is for entertainment purposes only. All the statements and are speculative about King Charles. And they're not purported to be facts. These are all just astrological observations and speculations. All right, let's go ahead and we're going to pull up the chart of King Charles just so you all can see. Here's the chart. And so if you look at the chart, you're going to notice, all these symbols represent different planets within the chart. So we're going to go through and kind of describe, mainly we're going to look at the houses that have planets in them. And then we're also going to be talking about, like, when we look at the karmic challenges with Saturn, we'll be looking at the Saturn aspects. Now, I won't be looking at every single planetary aspect in the chart, just for making this video within a good length of time. But let's go ahead and really talk about the first thing I want to bring up is the rising nakshatra of King Charles. And let me show you what that means. So those of you that are new to Vedic astrology, they have 27 nakshatras that span the 12 signs of the whole zodiac. Okay. So these are called nakshatras, and these are essentially stars. Okay. So 27 stars. Now we know that King Charles is a Cancer ascendant. But if we actually look at the ascendant sign, it's at 12 degrees. I don't know if you can see it right there. It's at 12 degrees. And so the closest star to that is going to be that rising nakshatra we're talking about. This gives us a little bit more information about who King Charles is. I mean, we already get quite a bit of information just knowing he's a Cancer ascendant. But I always include this in my client ratings because this gives us a little bit more detailed observation here. So King Charles is what's known as Pushya Nakshatra. Okay. And Nakshatra means constellation or star. Okay. Nakshatra. So that's the rising nakshatra. Remember, this is 1 out of 27. So Pushya Nakshatra is King Charles. We're going to talk about that. I want to break that down for you. And then we're going to talk about Cancer Ascendant. So let me go ahead and pull up the slide for you all. So Pushya Nakshatra, the one thing I want you to point out is it's ruled by the planet Saturn. So people that belong to this are born under this star, they tend to have Saturnian traits. They tend to be very disciplined. They like to have a sense of order. But Pushya's a very spiritual nakshatra, believe it or not. So they tend to be people that are really involved with religious ritual. And they definitely, for example, it's interesting that King Charles is, head of the Church of England. So it's usually more of an esoteric and religious type of responsibility that comes with Pusha, but it is one of the most auspicious nakshatras. So, for example, like it says in the slide, this Shakti gives the ability to achieve spiritual growth and enlightenment, making individuals born under Pusha Nakshatra adept at gaining and imparting knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual insight. So they also embody a lot of Cancerian qualities. For example, they have a protective nature. And like I said at the bottom, Pusha people are usually drawn to religious structures and rituals. They tend to be very conservative and family oriented in nature. So a lot of times, what I want to really emphasize with this is, believe it or not, King Charles may have a spiritual side to himself, but there is a sense of decorum about it. Okay. A lot of times there's kind of like this formal ritual that Pusha people are usually a part of. But the Shakti, it is the ability to generate spiritual energy. So it's actually a very powerful nakshatra and a very powerful placement there. Now let's talk a little bit about the rising sign. So you all probably remember, and I just put that up earlier, he's Cancer ascendant. Okay, so the moon is going to be, if we look, the moon is the ruler of the overall chart. When we look at an astrology chart, it is important to note what your ruling planet is and where it is in the chart. So if we look at King Charles' chart, it's in the 10th house of Aries. It's with Rahu. We're going to break that a little bit down in a little bit more down in a few minutes. But what I want to break down is when moon's in the 10th house, it shows somebody that in this lifetime, they're going to have a lot of public responsibility. And that, I feel like that's an understatement, right? With the public responsibility that's in this lifetime. So let's talk about Cancer ascendant. Okay, now your ascendant sign is different from your moon sign. So in Vedic astrology, the moon sign is going to be Aries for King Charles. So the ascendant sign is different from the moon sign. Now, Cancer ascendant, it's just like Western astrology, a lot of the same definition. So Cancer people tend to be very highly sensitive, in tune with their emotions. They do tend to be intuitive. Most people that are Cancer ascendant do have some sort of psychic or intuitive, at least they're empathic to people. They're fiercely loyal to their loved ones. They're very protective. So when we think about the recent situation with Catherine, Princess of Wales, this is definitely a situation where, this is going to be a circle the wagons type of energy with Cancer ascendant. So this need to maintain privacy. So King Charles uh, is well aware of this need to maintain privacy to shield Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Prince William, probably from the media scrutiny and so forth. So he's going to have a natural inclination. It's not even something that he really needs to analyze too much. They have a strong memory and attachment to the past, often reflecting on past experiences. So he's going to be very nostalgic, probably has a lot of keepsakes at home, little memories of his past, probably likes looking at pictures from the past. He's also going to be somebody that values his own space and privacy. So if you remember, when we look at Queen Camilla's chart, she has her moon in the 12th house. And that's kind of interesting because that means they're two peas in a pod. Essentially, they both value their privacy, but it's a different. It's interesting because even though he values his privacy, there is this strong inclination to really have those leadership qualities with his moon in the 10th house and Rahu in the 10th house. It does show some aspirations there for leadership and to make a positive impact within this current lifetime. The next thing we're going to look at in the astrology chart is the Saturn placement. Now, what I really want you all to know is Saturn is basically going to create karmic challenges in 4 different houses within the astrology chart. So first of all, it's going to impact the second house itself, and then it's going to impact 3 other houses besides the second house. Now, the houses that Saturn aspects in Vedic astrology is going to be the houses 3 houses from itself, 7 houses from itself, and 10 houses from itself. So in Vedic astrology, I'm going to show you how we count the houses. So we would label this Saturn, we would say this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and let me label these real quick. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So Saturn aspects, remember, 3 houses from itself. So it's going to be aspecting the 4th house of Libra. It's going to aspect 7 houses from itself. So Saturn's aspecting the 8th house of Aquarius. And then it's aspecting 10 houses from itself. So it's also going to be aspecting the 11th house of Taurus. And in Vedic astrology, it's not the degree that necessarily gets aspected, it's the entire sign that's aspected. So any planets within that sign are going to be influenced by Saturn. Now, for Cancer ascendant, Saturn can be a difficult energy to deal with because it rules the 8th house, but it also rules the house of marriage as well. So, I mean, we got marriage and then we got 8th house there too, but 8th house is one of the evil houses. So it can be a difficult planet. In general, even if Saturn rules like positive houses in the chart, I want you to know that it's still going to represent karmic challenges. So let's talk about what Saturn in the 2nd house represent. It really represents family karma, and it usually represents besides family karma, financial karma, usually negative finances. But this is a very unique situation because he's born in the royalty, so the financial impact of it might not manifest as much as it would be just for the average person. So the average person, Saturn in the second house is usually going to create some financial difficulty throughout the lifetime. It's going to be a little bit different in the case of King Charles. So we'll talk about that right now. And let me put this back on, put the slide back on stage. So Saturn in the 2nd house, what it will do is it does cause somebody to be very cautious about money. They might be very frugal. I think when I watched The Crown, and hold on everybody, I know The Crown isn't entirely accurate, but they did portray King Charles within the Crown, that he was somebody that was wanting to like modernize and maybe cut costs. Well, that would be indicated with Saturn in 2nd house. It's like somebody who wants to cut costs, somebody who wants to try to save money, somebody who may feel that there's a lack of resources. Okay. And this could be, it could be that he got a lot of this from his mother, the queen. Maybe she was very frugal in a lot of ways, even though they're royalty. We have to keep it in the context of who they are. What does frugal mean for them is going to be definitely frugal, different frugal for the average person. Saturn in the 2nd house is going to show struggles with self-esteem and self-worth. There could be possible issues with speech. So a lot of times people that have Saturn in the 2nd house, they tend to be censored when they're younger. Like people tell them that they need to be quiet and not have an opinion. This may or may not be the case with King Charles. He might have been told, just sit there and listen. And sometimes that can affect the sense of self-worth in the lifetime because it's almost like you feel like your opinion doesn't matter. There also can be difficulty in acquiring new languages within the lifetime. We did see that actually in the Crown. I believe he was learning Welsh and he had to really struggle to get that language down for that speech that he was able to give, but he was able to do it. It just takes a lot of effort when you have Saturn in the 2nd house. Now, about the family of origin, remember that this is the experience that King Charles has. Okay, so it could represent having a very strict upbringing. There's a lot of rules, and I could only imagine, being raised as a royal, all the procedures and the decorum and the rituals, all these things, just having to learn all these things, and maybe even having this formal way that you even have to approach your parents. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. It might have been like they had to do it in specific ways. Now, I don't know what the personal dynamics were, but there's definitely a sense of rigidness or strictness within the family of origin. Usually in an average person, if we want to call it an average person's chart, usually it means a family that's really like work oriented, working class, or it can represent a family that like they're religious, they have a lot of rules, or somebody in the family's in the military and they're kind of, they may have an authoritarian atmosphere they live under. Um, so I do want to point out that the self-esteem was definitely, with Saturn in the second house, it's definitely someone that wasn't coddled, at least within his family culture. Maybe there was a lot expected. I remember he went to that school in Scotland, remember, and that was a very difficult experience. Sorry, usually people that have Saturn in the second house usually people that have Saturn in the second house, they have some sort of bad memory about their childhood. It can be kind of a sad thing. Now let's talk about Saturn in the aspecting the fourth house of the chart. Remember, we talked about that. And let me bring that up for you. Remember the first aspect of Saturn, it's the third aspect is going to the fourth house. There's a lot of things going on there. Of course, it's aspecting all the planets in the fourth house. But let's talk about what it generally means when it's aspecting just the fourth house in general. So when Saturn's aspecting the fourth house, there's a lot of heavy karma with early education, and I think I might have wrote about that, but that definitely goes. It For example, having strict school teachers could be an example, like the school in Scotland that King Charles went to. Also, it can affect their relationship with mother figures, the queen. But I want to put this in a way that's polite, because I've had many different clients where they have Saturn either in the fourth house or aspecting the fourth house, and it can go one of two ways. It could represent a very hardworking mother where the mother wasn't as around, maybe around as much as they would have liked. So sometimes it can represent a certain amount of neglect there. Remember, this is from the personal point of view of King Charles' chart. And it could be that the mother is burdened by responsibility. For average people, it usually is going to represent a delay in obtaining a house in the lifetime, in vehicles, and there's going to be a lot of expenditures with those types of things. In the case of King Charles, it could represent that the estates, they require a lot of upkeep and resources to maintain. So they could be, it could be something that he worries about. These various royal estates that are going on, maybe they take a lot of resources, time, and energy that maybe he doesn't have. Maybe at this point he doesn't have. So that's what it can represent. Um, Now there is a fear there. Fourth house does represent your general level of well-being and happiness. So this can also, and Saturn represents fear. So there could be this idea of he likes to have regular routines and rituals. I did see a video somewhere where like and this is all anecdotal. I don't even know if this is the truth, but I saw a YouTube video where they're saying like every morning he likes to have like a particular breakfast. So with Saturn aspecting the fourth house, it's going to show somebody who likes these like regular rituals, as it kind of gives them a sense of emotional security with these things. Now let's talk about the next house. So we just talked about Saturn aspecting the fourth house. Saturn's also aspecting the eighth house. Now, typically in a person's chart, an eighth house it does represent things like in-laws, inheritance, insurance payouts. And we'll talk about what this means from King Charles's chart point of view. Now, I'm not sure what his relationship was with his first wife. It's usually the in-laws of the first marriage, so Princess Diana. The Spencers, I believe, someone can correct me down in the comments. There could have been some difficulty there. So it can represent a few different things. It can represent like a lack of support from the in-laws. It can represent the in-laws may be critical in some way. There might have been something about them, and I don't know if this was talked about in the media or not. But Saturn in the eighth house, or aspecting the eighth house, definitely does suggest it. It does represent in-laws. There can be difficulty in making life changes. So, for example, when King Charles, when the marriage was over with Princess Diana, there was a really long period before he married Queen Camilla. So that would show, there's always this really long periods before things change. It wasn't like he divorced Princess Diana and then married Queen Camilla the next day. It was many, many years before that formally actually happened. So that would be Saturn aspecting the eighth house. In a in an average chart, it's going to represent somebody having a restricted inheritance, like a reduced, or sometimes they don't get an inheritance from their family at all. Or it can represent a restricted insurance payouts. Like if for example, someone got in a car accident, usually the insurance is going to be lackluster. The payout you get is going to be undervalued in some way. Now, in King Charles's chart, it may represent other things. Okay, so inheritance, insurance payouts. This could represent, because eighth house does represent other people's money. It could represent cuts from like government expenditures. Like they're keeping on. They might keep cutting those things, giving the royal family less and less money, where he's going to have to pick up the tab through his own, estate or resources. That's what it could represent. So eighth house represents other people's money. So it's restricted in this lifetime. You're kind of like more on your own. There also may be an attraction to occult sciences, mysticism, esoteric knowledge. There's difficulty really acquiring that knowledge in this life. And also, there may be involvement in various crises or emergency situations. And I think we've already seen this from the first year that King Charles is in Buckingham Palace there. Now, I do want to point out that usually when Saturn is aspecting the eighth house, usually it does tend to extend the lifespan. So that's something I do want to point out. But we have to remember when we're looking at King Charles's chart that Jupiter's in the sixth house. So we always have to look at things in counterbalance to other planetary placements, because Jupiter in the sixth house would represent maybe difficulty with disease and imbalance this lifetime, even though Saturn's is aspecting the eighth house, which does typically extend the lifespan for people. Let's talk about the third aspect of Saturn in King Charles's chart. The third aspect, remember, it's going to be the 11th house. The 11th house represents friendship networks. It represents salary. So for a normal person, usually it represents like being underpaid in your jobs, maybe just having a few friends and acquaintances. It can limit your access to networks of people and networks, associations and so forth. Let me bring that up to give you a little bit more of an overview there. So there could be difficulties in forming and maintaining friendships, achieving personal goals. The 11th house represents like achieving your wishes, your desires, your goals. It takes longer than expected. So, maybe King Charles wanted to have more leadership roles within the royal family early on, but he had to wait a long time before he was given those responsibilities. There's a preference for just a few friends that are loyal over just having like a large amount of acquaintances. Now, I know he's a king, so this might be a little bit complicated because he does have to maintain acquaintances, for diplomatic reasons and things like that. There also is the idea that he may be forced to take on roles to help the community and social organizations. He does have Jupiter in the sixth house, so I actually do feel like he is a naturally charitable person. So I don't want to say he's being forced to take these roles, but I do feel like there is the sense when you're born in the royal family, you're expected to take some sort of like a role in various charities and things like that. Now, I don't know how this would necessarily interpret for King Charles, but there could be, for example, because there's restrictions in financial gains, it might be that throughout King Charles's life, maybe his investments, and this is a big, remember, entertainment purposes only. Uh, but maybe his investments haven't panned out as much as he would have thought they would have, because Saturn does restrict that. Saturn restricts the income, the salary. So it does tend to reduce that, or at least create disappointing results. There may have been projects he wanted to invest in, and maybe the fruit of it wasn't that great. Let's talk about the next house within the chart. You'll notice that Venus is in the third house of Virgo within the astrology chart. And let me go ahead and circle that. So we have Venus, the third house. Now, the third house can represent siblings. It can represent our communication style. It can even represent entrepreneurship. So, maybe if he was born not as a royal, he could have been a business person, because Venus represents opulence, wealth, through like your own business, creating your own business. So he may actually have a way of making money through various business enterprises, but I don't think that's his goal. There's other meanings of this, so let's talk about that in the slide here. Let me bring that up for you all. So Venus in the third house. It also represents the first spouse, by the way. Usually, traditionally in a man's chart, the first spouse may be very chatty and social because the third house represents chattiness, like very surface level kind of conversations that you have with people. There may be an enjoyable bond with brothers and sisters. Third house does represent siblings, and Venus represents the things we enjoy in life. So, for the most part, I know there's been some scandals in the royal family. Don't get me wrong. But for the most part, he may have enjoyed his relationship with his brothers and sisters. It might have been overall positive. He also may be, for hobbies, drawn towards artistic pursuits like literature, music, visual arts. He might enjoy that thing. I know he unveiled that painting recently. He actually might like art and paintings and things like that. And this actually does make him quite diplomatic because the third house represents your cordiality, being cordial in like normal, just everyday social situations. Third house is not the house of deep discussions, it's the house of small talk. So he's very gracious and good at small talk. If he just meets, average people in the street, he's going to know how to have a nice, pleasant conversation where the people are going to feel like, hey, I like King Charles. He's actually a really, really stellar person. So that's the type of small talk. The ninth house is more what represents like deep conversations and when we get to depth about those sorts of things. And Princess Diana, by the way, because Venus represents usually the first spouse in the astrology chart, she was known for just having this flair and flamboyance, and so that definitely does line up with that. Now let's talk about the next house. There's a lot going on in the fourth house of King Charles' chart. Okay, I mean, we can look right there. So we have the Saturn aspect. We talked about the Saturn aspect, but then we got K2, Mercury, and Sun. We're going to try to unpack this we're going to try to do this in a good pace here. But K2 it represents past life influences. It also represents things that there might be an apathy towards or a disconnection towards in this lifetime. So, and we're going to discuss that in the slide. Also, what K2 typically does is it does tend to, weaken the planets it's with. And it's not that it weakens the planets per se, but it causes like an apathy towards the energy of those planets. So there is this interesting contradiction in the chart. So Rahu's in the 10th house, which represents a desire for leadership, responsibility. But then with K2 with Sun in the astrology chart, it could represent somebody that maybe they don't desire the ego fame per se. Maybe they want the responsibility, they like the leadership, but maybe they don't necessarily like all the glitz and glamour and having to be in front of the camera all the time, because that's more what the Sun represents. It represents a certain amount of flamboyance and charisma. Let's go talk about that. So there's several things in the slide that we need to talk about. So K2 in the fourth house is going to show somebody they may prefer solitude and introspection. But again, Rahu's in the 10th. So there's also this desire to have these public responsibilities. Now, this is an interesting thing about K2 being in the fourth house. It actually can show a detachment from one's family and ancestral roots in some sort of way. Sometimes when K2 is in the fourth house, there can be the feeling that one is like doesn't fully belong. Like they may feel a little bit like the other in the family, or sometimes it can create situations where one may feel like a black sheep or something like that within the family, that their opinions and what interests them are different. So for example, if we think of Prince Philip and King Charles, Prince Philip loved going to that school over in Scotland. He loved the sportiness, he loved all those things. But King Charles, when he was Prince Charles back then, didn't necessarily have the same interests as Prince Philip. So we got to keep that in mind. One may enjoy one's family, like it says in the slide, but there's always a vague sense of maybe not fully belonging or not feeling understood would be it. Now we can understand the queen was probably from a young age. She was always busy with engagements, and there was probably a lot of formality. So there can be a feeling, a vague sense of like a disconnection there. Like maybe it doesn't feel like what a normal person's bond with their mother would be like. It doesn't feel like that really intimate sense of nurturing, that one would you normally get from one's mother. The difficult thing about this placement with K2 in the fourth house, it can feel like you really don't belong anywhere on this planet. Like it can feel like you can't settle down roots. You may not identify with places and people. You may like feel always there can be a feeling like you're a foreigner everywhere you go. Even though it's the country and the people you belong to, there may be a feeling emotionally like you're a foreigner of some sort. Mother figures can seem detached from this point of view. And like I said, it might not be the queen's fault. It might be that she was busy a lot and it seemed like there was this sense of detachment there. There can be some rebellions from traditional values or cultural norms in the chart, but I do want to say with Saturn in the second house, there's a contradiction there. So he may be forced to uphold a lot of traditions, but deep down, he would like to change a lot of things about the royal family or the establishment. But maybe, even though he's the king, there's probably this big machine and momentum behind a lot of these things, or maybe he can't change certain customs or cultural norms. So, like I said at the bottom of the slide, one may want to break free from tradition, but they can't. Let's talk about the other planets. So we got Sun in the fourth house. The father is represented by the sun in an astrology chart, so it can represent the father may have been seen a little bit as the homebody. I know that they always portrayed Prince Philip as kind of sporty, but there might have been a sense from Prince Philip or from King Charles' point of view. Maybe he did seem like a little bit like a homebody. There might have been a little bit of emotional distance with the father just because the son is with K2. It can also represent the son, the father not having as much authority, and this is pretty obvious in this situation, right? For example, Prince Philip may have been overshadowed by the queen from the perspective of the chart. So everything was. I'm sure the center of the family was the queen. So it might feel like the father's overshadowed. So K2's with Sun, right? There's a weakening there. Sun in the fourth house is going to show fourth house represents environmental matters. So there could be an interest in environmental protection in there. Now, I do want to bring up that the sun is debilitated in the sign of Libra. So there's a lot of learning how to use power and charisma in this lifetime. So, for example, Libra, sun in Libra can represent, because it's debilitated, can represent a weakening of the life force. Well, we know that there's been some health issues there. And so that's definitely come up to the surface. Also, when sun is debilitated in Libra, this could suggest the need to develop self-confidence in this lifetime. This is a hard road for somebody, because when sun is when Saturn is in the second house, it shows that somebody already kind of has self-esteem. Their feelings of self-worth may have been negatively affected in their life. And then you have Saturn also aspecting the sun as well. So there's definitely like, he has to learn how to be self-confident in this lifetime. Now, I feel like he's already largely achieved that, but what it shows is he had to struggle to really earn people's respect. He had to struggle through his lifetimes, maybe in situations that us everyday people, we didn't see. In just like social situations with people, he had to really learn to assert himself to get the respect that he needs. Now let's talk about the other planet in the fourth house. Remember, there's a stellium of planets in the fourth house. Mercury's also in the fourth house. Because the fourth house represents mother and then the sun represents father, it can show that both parents are actually very witty and intelligent. So that's one thing. They may have been very verbose, opinionated. When he did have access to his parents, they may have actually had very strong opinions, had a lot of conversations, been very intellectual, very smart. Those are all qualities of the parents. Also, I do want to talk about Mercury with Sun does form something called Aditya Yoga, which usually gives somebody an above average level of intelligence. So it makes somebody rather intelligent. However, Mercury is the 12th lord in the chart. The 12th lord does represent losses. So again, remember I told you earlier about this idea of like real estate might be one of these situations where there's always financial losses associated with real estate. Now, like I said, I'm just looking at the astrology chart. I don't actually know like how the royal estates work, but there may be some sort of money drain in some way on some issue with that, or maybe there was some funding that they had in the past that they don't have anymore. It also may feel, like I said in the chart, one feels like they're losing vitality if they stay at home too often. So that he might be very averse to being at home and being a homebody. Okay. Let's talk about the next placement in the astrology chart, since we're really going down this journey of really trying to understand King Charles. Let's pull up the chart again here. So let me clean this up from our past conversation and let's talk about Mars in the fifth house. Now, Mars is strong in his chart. I mean, it's in the sign of Scorpio. The fifth house represents a few different indications there. So the fifth house does represent children. It does represent things like sport, romance, and even artistic. So when Mars is in the fifth house, somebody can be incredibly artistic. Now, I don't know exactly what King Charles's talent is, but he may have some sort of hobby, either like painting, writing, something creative. There's some creative thing that he needs. Or this can manifest as somebody who is very sporting. They like sports. So, and also the children may be very competitive also, by the way, with this placement. So let's talk about that. Mars in the fifth house. The fifth house can represent children in a general sense, but I want you to know it really particularly represents the first child. It represents in a general sense, but it really mostly the first child. So they would mostly represent Prince William. So Prince William may be very sporty, very may have a temper because Mars is in the fifth house. Maybe Prince William is very opinionated from the perspective of King Charles. Remember, this is his chart. The children in general may be very competitive. So Prince Harry, Prince William, maybe they were very competitive as children. This is interesting. The fifth house represents dating and romance. So, Mars in the fifth house can make somebody very assertive in their romantic relationships. So that's something to know. Also, like I said, one of the downside about Mars being in the fifth house, it can make someone rather impulsive. So they have to be careful about being impulsive about things in their life. Let's go pull up the chart again. We're going to go to the next house. Jupiter's generally a good planet, but in this respect, I do want to point out it can be a little bit difficult, and I'm going to explain why here. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. So Jupiter usually represents karmic credit within an astrology chart. But remember, wherever Jupiter is in your astrology chart, it multiplies. So it multiplies whatever that house represents. So if it's in a negative house like the sixth house, it can multiply what the sixth house represents. And the sixth house does represent things like disease, enemies, adversaries. So there might be quite a number of issues there, but it also does have a positive meaning. And I'm going to talk about that right now. It's not entirely bad, but it's a little bit complex of a placement. So, for example, this person may have a lot of enemies, adversaries. They may have a lot of health concerns throughout the lifetime because, and obviously we had the cancer diagnosis recently. We had, around the time, was it before the coronation or at the coronation, people were noticing that King Charles, the fingers, there was something going on with, he had very swollen looking fingers. So that might be something that's a lifelong struggle with Jupiter being in the sixth house. But I do want to point out that the sixth house is also known as the house of service. It's known as like helping the disadvantaged is a big meaning of the sixth house. So for example, the sixth house represents like homeless people, represents people that have like a lack of food security. It represents people that are impoverished. So when you have Jupiter there, it can represent actually being a positive influence in helping people in those situations. So people in conflicted or imbalanced situations. So it could show on a positive note, King Charles may be somebody that's very devoted to charity work, very devoted to champion causes for the disadvantage. Okay. And he may really believe, and I know maybe some people, may snark at this, they thinking like, oh, why would a royal person, care about the disadvantage? But he like, remember, Jupiter represents your beliefs. He may have some strong beliefs. He may realize he's very fortunate in this lifetime. Maybe he's traveled enough to know that he's had a fortunate birth in that he was born into the royal family. There is a certain amount of humility for King Charles. Remember, Saturn's in the second house. So there is a certain level of empathy that's there. I do want to point that out. So before we just kind of poo-poo the idea of him having compassion for those that are disadvantaged, I would say I feel like generally he does with Jupiter in the sixth house. Now let's go ahead and talk about the other placement here, and then we got kind of a good overview here of the astrology chart. The next thing we're going to talk about is Moon and Rahu in the 10th house of Aries there. Okay. Now remember, Ketu, this is always an axis, by the way, Ketu and Rahu. So Ketu is always going to be past life influences. Rahu is going to be what the current lifetime you want to experience with your desires. One of the things I want to bring up about Rahu, it's one of the reasons that we decide to reincarnate. So we have past life karma that we're trying to pay back, which is one of the reasons we're here on this earth. And then we also have unfulfilled desires from past lifetimes that we're trying to experience in this lifetime as well. So that's what Rahu is. It's these suppressed desires that may have been, in past lifetimes, they might have not been allowed to be expressed fully. So in this lifetime, Rahu can be somewhat of a magical planet because of its ability to manifest those desires. And by the way, everybody has Rahu in their chart. So everyone, you all have some sort of past life desire that you're working on. Even spiritual saints and yogis, they have Rahu in their charts. Somebody can actually have Rahu in a spiritual house, and there can be too much of a desire for the spiritual life. Because remember, the ultimate goal of spirituality is to let go of even the desire for it to be spiritual, right? That you're letting go of all desire. That's the final end. Now let's talk about Rahu and Moon in the 10th house. So Rahu in the 10th house is going to show in this lifetime there's a desire for leadership and responsibility. Now Ketu's with Sun, so it could be like responsibility, but without all the glitz, glamour, and flamboyancy. There's just a sense, just having that sense of leadership. Okay. It can be more leadership from behind the closed doors or from behind the scenes. It could represent that. Remember, Moon and the Moon represents mother. So it would represent the queen. Remember the fourth house also represents mother too. So that's why we've already talked about the queen. So I just want to back up for a second. When we look at mother in an astrology chart, we have to look at the fourth house and the moon. When we look at the father in astrology chart, we have to look at the sun and the ninth house. So if one of those situations is conflicted, like say moon is afflicted in the chart, well, then we look at the fourth house. And if the fourth house isn't afflicted, it could represent a relationship that's complicated, but it's still an enjoyable relationship, but it might not be perfect. Okay. So the mother, because moon is in the 10th house with Rahu, the mother may have been quite ambitious. Even though the queen was humble in her own way, she may have been quite ambitious. She might have been a natural leader with moon in the 10th house. And I think a lot of people can attest to the natural leadership. There's a desire there. This is kind of interesting because Rahu's with moon. There's a desire to be like his mother. So he may actually take her to be a role model of the type of leadership that he wants to do. Now, he may have his own spin he wants to make on it. Remember, because Ketu's in the fourth house, he does kind of want to break away from tradition, but Saturn in the second house is causing where he can't fully break away from tradition. He does admire some qualities about his mother, though. There is a need to develop in this lifetime assertiveness. Remember, Sun is debilitated, and then he's got Rahu in the sign of Aries. So he does need to be kind of put his foot down about certain issues. There might be times where he wants to be a little more diplomatic than he should, where he should kind of just tell it like it is. There may be situations like that. We may or may not know about those situations. The downside about Rahu being with Moon is when Rahu's near the sun or moon. Remember, Rahu's what we see, it's the shadow we see in an eclipse. So it can cause a disturbance there. So it can cause somebody to have fluctuating moods, a little bit of a disturbance there. Remember, Saturn's aspecting the fourth house. So the sense of happiness can be kind of ups and downs. And at the end of the day, we have to remember that King Charles is a Cancer ascendant. And remember, the moon is all about the tides. So the moon, the emotions, they ebb and flow just like the ocean's tides with Cancer people. So there may be times where King Charles needs to go be alone for a while to recharge. Maybe he can't be out all the time. Cancer people do need to kind of crawl back into their shell once in a while. If they get too much out in the public, they kind of do need to like retreat for a little while. So it does show the need to also in this lifetime, even though he is asserting himself with Rahu and the sign of Aries, I do want to bring up he is developing empathy and compassion in this lifetime. So some of the experiences he may have had with Saturn being in the second house, he's had some humbling experiences in his lifetime, and those may have been designed to make him more humble so that he could be more compassionate and have empathy for people in his life. So that's what we have. That was a general overview of a King Charles chart. I hope you all got quite a bit of information out of that. One of the things I like to think about when I look at an astrology chart is we all are imperfect people. So we all have strengths, we all have challenges. This is going to show up in anybody's chart. We're all going to have karmic challenges, and life isn't going to be absolutely easy for everybody. Now, in King Charles' chart, he may have, for example, access to resources, money, and things like that, prestige. But on the flip side, the karma we receive, there's always going to be something that compensates for that. So, for example, he may be born in the royal family, he may have a lot of prestige and money, but his emotional relationships may have been very formal, very rigid, and there might have been a feeling of a lack of nurturing. Whereas somebody who maybe was born with a lot of less financial wealth, maybe they had a very loving a mother or somebody that was around and able to fulfill a lot of their emotional needs. So there's always something compensating in the astrology chart. Even when we look at like presidents and celebrities, everybody has some sort of difficult karma that they're working through. And this is not, King Charles is not an exception. So everybody has difficulties. But overall, the chart does show an empathic type of person, a person that if you did meet on the street, you probably would enjoy having a small conversation with them. I saw a video it was a TikTok, I believe, where some people came across King Charles near Balmoral, I think. They were like riding bikes. And he just seemed like a very stand up and very witty, fun person. So that's what that sort of thing means. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you want me to do more, I think I lost the mic for a second. If you want me to do more deep dives, let me know down in the comments below. And I will be more than happy to do these. There's a lot of preparation, so I want to make sure that people like these kind of readings first. But I'm also going to continue to do the astrology of just like looking at more narrowly defined questions as well. So thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.